and get ourselves perfect. Thank you. We're going to get ourselves started then. Thank you, Tanya, for getting everything rolling. Let me make sure I've got my script and everything else up. Tanya, we're going to start with the roll call, I assume.
Yes. So you call
Great.
the meeting to order. Let's go ahead and do roll call. Montserrat Caballero,
Present.
Dominique Calza, Paul Cunningham, Jason Freed,
Good afternoon.
hello, Armenia Prius, Stacy Gist, Ross McAllister,
Present.
Serena Preciado,
Present.
Taylor Pacheco, Dora Saldamondo,
Good afternoon.
Dr. Siqueiros,
Present.
Gina Vidal, and there we have it.
All right, thank you for going through that. As I pull up the agenda, we've got call to the order. Then are there any adjustments that need to be made to the agenda? I'll add that Stacy did let me know. She just sent me a text just a short while ago that she would not be able to be present. So she did say if we needed her because we were missing quorum to let her know. So fortunately, we should be good. I can see if I can try to touch base with Mr. Cunningham. With that, then it looks like we're on to 3.01. And so that's where I would ask if there is anybody who's present for call to the audience, Tanya.
At this time, no, we had no call to the audience.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we don't have call to the audience, and so we're not going to go through that script. And that will lead us straight into our action item 4.01, which is the minutes from the Budget Advisory Committee from October 27th. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to peruse those. Tanya sent those out to us. So when somebody feels comfortable, I will take a motion and a second on those minutes.
I'd like to move to adjust the meeting minutes.
Sure. What was needed to be addressed?
Yeah, so there was one vote that someone had voted abstain who is new to the meeting. I believe it was Mr. Siqueiros had voted abstain to approve the meeting minutes, but it said that he voted yes. And then also on the ESSER discussion, I had commented on that and that was missing from the minutes.
Okay. Tanya, were you able to catch those updates?
I did, thank you.
Of course. Then Taylor, I'm going to take that as a motion with amendment. Okay, perfect. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
I second that motion. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't know. I'm going to Albert. I'm going to give it to Dora. I think I'm going to say she beat you by just a fraction.
Just a few seconds. Yes, I second that motion.
Thank you very much. So we've got a motion and a second of approval of the minutes with those amendments. All in favor, please unmute and say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you. The motion carries and we have approved those minutes. We have quite an agenda for ourselves. And this is why, this is why we're ready to get our hands dirty. We've got some staff that are here to talk to us about literacy and the language proficiency. We had that conversation a couple of meetings ago, but we did not get to conclude that with a recommendation. So what we're looking to do is to hear that presentation, kind of go back over some of those pieces, and then to come out of that with a recommendation. I would greatly prefer not to have us, carry that over into another meeting. And so if we can please try to get ourselves, something that looks like a recommendation. What we will do is just a reminder for the the process that we did last year and that we're continuing this year, which is we'll come up with a preliminary recommendation for each of the pieces, and then on our last meeting we'll go through each one of those and approve them collectively. So so that's what we're going to do. First today is the budget priority of literacy and language proficiency. The presentation then will come forward with a recommendation. We'll do the same thing for the ESSER funded positions and the remaining balances in those accounts. We'll hear a presentation and then hopefully come forward with a recommendation. And then we will end the meeting by going over ESSER and what we're going to do moving forward. And then at the next meeting, we'll hear another presentation on that and conclude that with a recommendation. And that will then move us to our final piece, which is on capital funding. So if there was no amendments that anybody presented, so otherwise we're just going to move forward. I'm not sure who is taking the floor at this point. So who is it that's going to talk literacy with us?
That is us. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, committee members, for inviting us again in this space to talk about literacy. If possible, I'd like to share my screen, please.
Tanya, are you able to make that happen?
Yeah, she should be able to.
Okay, thank you. Floria, is it working now?
It says disabled participant screen sharing.
Let's see. Fixing it.
Okay. Okay, now I have it.
Okay,
Perfect.
good.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So can you confirm that you can see my presentation?
Yep.
All right, so once again, good afternoon, committee members. Thank you for inviting us to bring literacy again to the forefront. This is a very exciting opportunity for us to bring forth some recommendations around literacy. Before we get started, we wanted to anchor our conversation on the notion that literacy is a fundamental right, human right, that empowers individuals in a society. And as a public school district, it is important that we provide students with this, with a robust literacy education to provide this human right. For this afternoon, our goals are going to talk about what does the research say regarding the science of reading, literacy in K-12. We're also going to be discussing what are some of those evidence-based strategies to implement a robust literacy program. And lastly, we will be providing some recommendations to this committee. So we want to anchor on what does the research say specifically about literacy. So before we get started, we want to talk a little bit about the science of the science of reading. What is the science of reading? And essentially, it's built on two fundamental truths. The first one is that we were never born to read. Our brains are actually hardwired for speech and not print. And then the other one is that the alphabetic principle is the foundation of our alphabetic writing system. And it is fundamentally different from any pictographs or logographs from different systems. There has been many years of research that have been conducted over the last 5 decades across the world in multiple languages. And what the science of reading has culminated is a preponderance of evidence that informs how proficient reading and writing develop, why some students have some difficulty, and how we can most effectively assess and teach. Therefore, to improve student outcomes through prevention and intervention for reading difficulties. So we'll talk a little bit about some of this research. The 5 decades of research have basically come down to these 7 science of reading principles. That essentially, number 1, reading is not natural. It can and must be taught. Number 2, that background knowledge is as critical to comprehension as decoding skills. Number 3, that foundational skills instruction has to be systematic and explicit, beginning with sounds. Instruction has to be engaging through multiple modes and senses. And the science-based reading instruction does reduce the need for intervention and allows children to move forward as capable, confident learners. Number 6, that science-based reading instruction is a matter of equity. And the last one that you see on the screen is that science-based reading instruction is urgent and the most crucial work of the elementary teacher. And all of these principles come from the Reading League. They gathered together and they actually involved psychologists, brain specialists to come up with these 7 principles about the science of reading. So briefly, I'm going to talk about how reading is taught through the Scarborough's reading rope. And this is just a metaphor to discuss how those skills for reading are developed over time, and they're represented by the strands of the rope. So allow me to just spend just a couple of seconds here talking about this piece. So as you can see, the whole notion of reading, we have 2 main components. From the science of reading, there's language comprehension and word recognition. Under language comprehension, you see these strands: the background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, literacy knowledge. And then under word recognition, you see phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition, and so forth. All of these strands are woven together, and the tighter they are woven, they develop a skilled reader. But we need to have all of those components in place to have a skilled reader. So that's where the science of reading comes in terms of what structures need to be in place to develop those skilled readers. Okay. Literacy in K-12. So this is where I'm going to hand it off to our Senior Director of Curriculum and PD, Ms. Heidi Aranda, who's going to walk us through the essential elements of reading.
Good afternoon. Mute your speakers. Sorry about that. We're in the same room. So I'm going to be talking about just what does it look like at a K-12 system. And so what you're looking at on your screen are the 5 essential elements of teaching reading. And these describe the skills and big ideas that develop over time to produce skilled readers. These elements are evident in K-12 classrooms. However, as you can imagine, there is a much stronger emphasis and time allotment in the younger grades on phonics and phonemic awareness, and a stronger emphasis on vocabulary and comprehension as students move into these secondary grades. And as they do that transition towards learning to read and then reading to learn, so as they transfer to more proficient readers, they're using those reading skills to learn. So explicit reading instruction in the essential elements is integrated in experiences through listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So when teachers are teaching phonics or phonemic awareness or vocabulary or comprehension, they are engaging students in experiences that involve listening, speaking, reading, and writing. In TUSD, you'll see teachers using a variety of instructional formats, such as full group or small group instruction, either small group reading, guided reading, or independent small groups, in order to meet the needs of all learners. Small group guided reading instruction allows teachers to provide additional and targeted doses of instruction. So some of our students might need an additional experience or opportunity with the same content. And so teachers use small group instruction to really target the individual needs of students. The structured literacy approach benefits all children. So like I said, if their individual needs are being met, it's individual needs of all students, regardless of whether they are struggling with learning how to read or they are proficient readers. Small group instruction helps teachers meet those needs. However, it is absolutely essential for our struggling readers to have a structured literacy approach. It is what we would call maybe a non-negotiable. And so in TUSD, some of our challenges in really meeting the needs of all students really is a need for more training. As you can imagine, our teachers, especially our elementary teachers, they are teaching reading, writing, math, social studies, science, PE. They teach all content areas. And this structured literacy approach and the science of reading requires really an in-depth knowledge of those essential elements and how to even diagnose in students where they are lacking some of these skills, and then how best to provide instruction in those identified skill areas. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about what are the evidence-based strategies to implement a robust literacy program. Forward. Wait. Okay. So let's think for a minute about the K-5 classroom. You see here that heavy emphasis on phonemic awareness and phonics. And as you can see in the slide, it really, the key words here are explicit and systematic. So instead of saying, I'm going to teach kids about ER words today, it's really going along a sequence that is scientifically based to teach different phonetic principles and phonemic awareness. So it's that explicit and systematic piece that make the instruction effective. Connect text reading to build reading accuracy, automaticity, fluency, and comprehension. So it's once they are learning to decode through phonics and phonemic awareness, kids are now connecting the text to build that fluency and comprehension. Read alouds are absolutely important from a variety of complex texts, because as students are learning to read, they need to also experience complex texts, even if they can't read those independently, in order for them to build that background knowledge and vocabulary. Robust conversations to develop students' academic language. So in the classroom, we should see and hear the students' voice and their conversations with each other as they practice that academic language and vocabulary. And then explicit instruction in grammatical structures and academic vocabulary within the context of other reading activities, as well as some of their cross-content or interdisciplinary focus. In 612 literacy, you see a shift. You don't see as much of that emphasis on phonemic awareness and phonics. You see explicit vocabulary instruction and direct and explicit comprehension strategy instruction. So what are the key strategies that students use and implement in order to comprehend a text? And opportunities for extended discussion. So again, having kids talk about text in the classroom for meaning and interpretation. Increasing student motivation and engagement in literacy. So what is really important here is making sure that students are reading content of interest to them, and that they are beginning to develop really the confidence as readers. And then finally, and this is something we do hear quite a bit from our secondary schools, is that there are still many students struggling to read in secondary. And so we must still continue to provide and make available intensive and individualized interventions for our struggling readers that can be provided by trained specialists. That's really important because, as I said, we do shift away from phonics and phonemic awareness and more into vocabulary and comprehension, but we still need to remember that many of our students are behind in reading and still struggling to learn to read. So we still need to accommodate for that and make available those interventions. Next slide. So some strategies that are, Lori, am I frozen? Oh, some strategies that are critical in moving forward K-12 is that we we really need to provide targeted professional development to build teacher capacity, especially on the science of reading and dyslexia identification, as well as strategies to implement for our struggling readers specifically. Professional development and student-specific learning strategies related to reading, professional development in teaching and instructional strategies. We need to make sure that our teachers have high quality curriculum materials to use as resources, to support them in the implementation of small group instruction to accelerate student learning, and to continue to provide summer instruction to offset summer learning loss, especially for our struggling readers. So mine is delayed. Okay, so next I want to share what are some current efforts that TUSD arts curriculum, and we are working with our teachers to implement that K-5 adoption with integrity. In addition, we are beginning an effort this spring to train 200 teachers and instructional staff on the science of reading and dyslexia strategies. This is a requirement by the Arizona Department of Education. Each of our K-5 schools has to have an identified dyslexia designee, and that person has to be highly trained. So we are beginning that training, not just for our dyslexia designees at our elementary schools, but we're broadening. We even have some administrators that are wanting to take this training. So we'll have about 200 people that are trained. And once that is complete, which will be complete by December of 2023, then we will begin to develop a cohort of 20 to 30 staff as trainers to train all TUSD K-5 teachers in order that they may obtain their reading endorsement. So the Arizona legislature passed a law that all K-5 teachers must obtain their reading endorsement by 2028. So we are already beginning that plan. And any teachers that are going to now graduate with degrees in education must have the coursework that qualifies them to have a reading endorsement. In addition, we are training our curriculum service providers in the curriculum for English language arts and how to coach our teachers in order to increase effective teaching strategies. We have also begun to develop interdisciplinary curriculum development in science in K-5 and social studies in 612, as we know that that's absolutely critical that those literacy skills are not just developed in the ELA classrooms, but are also developed in content areas as well. So next, we would like to share what our recommendations are to the committee. These are gaps that have been identified by curriculum and instruction through feedback from teachers and administrators. For example, in our elementary grades, although we did adopt an ELA curriculum, it does not involve explicit writing instruction, and so a writing program for K-5 is needed. The other thing that we hear from schools a lot is that they need supplemental phonics instruction, especially for our struggling readers. And so having a common district phonics supplemental program would be helpful so that we can do adequate training for teachers to implement those additional experiences for struggling students. And of course, reading interventionists at all sites to support students that are behind and to support the classroom teachers in meeting those needs. professional development for all instructional staff on the science of reading and reading difficulties, and centralized coaching to follow up that training, to be able to co-teach in classrooms and model effective-based, evidence-based strategies in our ELA classrooms. And then finally, to train our administrators and instructional staff to identify and monitor strategies and to monitor the implementation of these in our district walkthroughs. In grades 6 through 12, we highly recommend an ELA adoption. The adoption, last adoption for ELA was in 2008, which is 14 years ago. It does not have current evidence levels for the Elementary and Secondary School Act. It also does not have any digital components, so it's very difficult for teachers to integrate technology using the ELA adoption because of how old it is. Again, we recommend reading interventionists to really support those struggling readers, especially at 612 that are that need that additional support. Professional development, again, for our staff and coaching to implement that professional development, training of administrators to monitor, as well as district monitoring through district walkthroughs. And that concludes our presentation and recommendations, and we'd like to open up to questions.
Wonderful. Thank you both Lori and Heidi for those presentations. We're going to start with Albert, and then we'll go from there. Remember, folks, I'm going to ask that as we go through this, we're thinking, we saw that recommendation that was just presented to us. We're going to make our own formal recommendation. So Albert, please.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, Heidi, a question for you on the professional development. Can you describe that a little more in detail, what that might look like? What's the sequence? Who goes first? And then the second question is the progress monitoring aspect of this. What are we using currently, and what do we intend to use moving forward, and what level of training will our teachers and administrators receive?
Absolutely. So our Arizona Department of Education has just released its guidance and training for these efforts on the science of reading. And so they have a recommended set of different options you can choose as a district to use to meet this requirement. So in Tucson Unified, we have selected what is called letters training. And it is 8 days, full days of training, as well as some homework in between, homework as well as taking an actual student implementing some of these strategies. So there's a lot of work in between the sessions. And so where we're starting is with 2 staff members at every school. One is the dyslexia designee at the site. And the dyslexia designee, ADE, requires that person is a classroom teacher. So it can't be, a support staff or CSP. It has to be a classroom teacher. So 1 classroom teacher and an additional staff member. So a principal might have identified another teacher or a curriculum service provider. So 2 people per site, K-5. As well as, for example, some of our central professional development academic trainers, some of our language acquisition coaches, just key staff that support teachers in literacy are also getting trained, as well as some really interested administrators that often provide guidance on literacy committees, et cetera. So that's our first group of people. It's 200 staff. And after that, we will select from that 200, 20 to 30 people to train as trainers. That will take another half a year. And then once we finish that, we'll begin to train our all teachers K-5 first. So K-5 will be our target audience for that training first. Not to say that we won't train secondary, but not on that specific training. So our secondary training will be more customized, more on comprehension, more on vocabulary instruction and interdisciplinary literacy. So once we finish those trainers will then begin training our elementary teachers. We'll begin with our youngest grades where they begin, you know, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, and move through that way. So we want to catch our most critical reading grades first, where literacy development is most heavy, and then we'll move through. Did I answer
Thank
all
you.
the questions?
Did you get both pieces, Albert?
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Thank you, Heidi. Ravi.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. And thank you for the presentation. Could you go back to the slides? I'm simply looking at one slide. It showed evidence-based interventions with the citation on the bottom. It had like 6 things on there.
Is that the one you're
That's
looking
it.
for?
So can you tell me more about this slide here? So a lot of it was professional development and some small group instruction and summer sessions. Is this, and from the citation here, is this kind of like the best group of evidence-based interventions? Is this the ones with most evidence for most improved outcomes? Is it just the ones that our TUSD team just feels like are the things that we can implement effectively? So why are these things here and things? So there's other things that we've been talking about, you know, whether
And so
libraries and literacy, you know, librarians and all these other interventions, you know, online platforms and things like, so can you tell me more about why these things are on this list?
Yeah, and some of those things that you mentioned, Dr. Ravi, are sort of in the background of these. For example, the purchase and use of high quality curriculum materials might include many of the things you're talking about, like some of the platforms that we use for intervention, some of the text that we purchase. So some of those, these are just broader categories, I guess, and it's also how you implement. So we have the science of reading, which is a research, right? And then we have the evidence-based strategies to implement that. So these are strategies that have proven effective to increase literacy achievement through high quality teaching, right? That's the best thing that improves literacy instruction. And so the citation you see at the bottom is the Arizona Department of Education's guidance on where districts should invest in order to develop a comprehensive literacy model. So that this is when we write literacy grants for ADE, they have some guidance on what are the strategies to spend the funds on.
And one of the things I'd like to
Things that
add,
are recommended right now.
oh, sorry.
in literacy.
One of the things I would like to add is that ADE does very robust evidence-based research, and they get together. In fact, the science of literacy is heavily researched, and that's why that the science of reading with the center, they came up with those principles that we presented earlier. So the evidence presents, and we know this, that the most impact in the classroom is the classroom teacher. Therefore, building their capacity around the science of reading, for example, making sure that we're very strategic in having a structured literacy approach has to be priority. The curricular materials and all of that, that's like Heidi said in the background, but this is what the evidence is telling us, that first and foremost, you build your capacity with the teacher in the classroom.
One more kind of question on this topic before I turn out to someone else. Sorry for it. I don't mean to monopolize. And I'm kind of pushing on this because this slide is as important for what's on it as much as what's not on it. so we get hit all the time. Like every call to the audience, there's, people talking about librarians and libraries and books, and there's all these other kind of interventions that we know exist, and a lot of money that we have spent and are spending on different interventions to help students with literacy, along with other academic achievement issues. So I want to kind of push it on why there are some items not on here, and is that purposeful? Is that I have the PDF, I pulled it up and stuff from the citation, 28 pages here. Like just trying to just see, like, is this list comprehensive? Are these like the main things that we should focus on for literacy, and not, if we're limited on resources, we shouldn't be spending money and time and energy on other interventions, and we should focus on this? Can you just kind of really hone in on kind of when we hear these people talking about all these other potential things we can do for literacy and what we aren't doing them? Like, I think we need to have a response ready. Like, we aren't doing, X, Y, and Z because we have limited resources, and those aren't the things that are best applicable to improve outcomes for our students.
So I will say that ESSA, the Elementary and Secondary School Act, I think that's Every Student Succeeds Act. It has required districts and state departments of ed to use evidence-based strategies. So for example, when we adopt a curriculum, it has to have a rating. And that rating means that they have submitted very rigorous studies that prove that that program is effective. ADE, and it's not just for programs, it's for professional development. It's for strategies like that. So what I can tell you about that list, and I think anything that people are recommending, you have to be able to provide ESSA evidence. And John can speak to this even more because he works with federal funding, and any dollars that are spent with federal funding have to be spent on things that are evidence-based. So the list that we're providing for you, these are evidence-based practices and strategies. These are things that are already vetted. You can find the research that is accepted for those practices. So it's not a list we chose. It's a list we took out of that document, and it's things that have an evidence base behind them.
Thank you. Robbie, does that answer your question?
It does, and I have the document here. I'm going to send that link because it's hard to copy it from that thing. I'll send it. Is there a chat fixture? I'll send it in the chat here, so anyone else who's interested can look at that as well. Looks like pages 12 to 18 are the evidence-based practices here. So yeah, I'll print this out and take a look at this. I think this can really help in terms of some understanding of this. I appreciate it. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Robbie. And folks, I'm not going to by any means limit debate. I want to continue this conversation. I am going to remind you we've got a pretty robust schedule for today. That doesn't change. We still, this is important work. Montserrat, if you will please share your question.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I have two questions. The professional development that you were talking about, where you're initially rolling it out, the first 200 people that I believe you said, those 200, the training would be done by 2023, and then it would move to all K-5. When will that second, all K-5 teachers, when will that be done? And then it may roll into my second question, because I'm looking at the other PowerPoint from your first presentation where you had the funding attached. And so that's my question is what you're presenting today the amounts of money I can find on this other PowerPoint that you shared, so I can go and see, okay, this professional development is costing this much? Is that an accurate way to do this? Because I don't see any budget, I don't see any money attached to this presentation. So I just want to make sure I have all the right information.
Yeah, you're right. We took that part out. We can make sure that we provide you with that. We have a grant from the Arizona Department of Education that is providing the money for the training, not for the subs, for teachers, things like that, but the training itself. So we have been applying for grants to cover some of those costs, but we can get a more detailed budget numbers for you. And
Yeah.
and in regards to the K-5, it'll take us a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, to really have all of our teachers trained.
Okay, so then a follow-up question to that. How would so you get this training rolling, it's going to be 2 to 3 years potentially. Another mandate comes down from ADE or another direction for literacy or, whatever happens. How do you balance that out? And then how do you handle a potential needing to shift direction? And then again, ultimately impact on the budget.
I would say, yeah, and I would say the thing that we were very careful about doing is selecting the training. This training is a training that we have done in the past in TUSD. So people are familiar with letters. We've had a lot of people say, oh, I've always wanted to take letters training, but it wasn't offered, district wide. And so we know that this training, if this mandate goes away, is still going to be a great training for our teachers to take, and important because I'll tell you right now, my daughter, graduated from the U of A in the last 5 years and is teaching young children, and she did not feel equipped to teach reading effectively. And so it is really an area that's absolutely critical for our teachers, and we need to continue robust professional development because it's not something you just learn to do in college.
I'm sorry, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
Is there any conversation of trying to integrate math word problems into all of this? Because we know first comes the reading comprehension, and math is so word problem focused that's really where people are struggling. So what kind of, I saw on one of the slides there was integration, I think, with the social studies curriculum, but any integration with math curriculum?
Yeah, so that's what we call really that interdisciplinary approach and literacy across the content.
Okay.
And that's even more difficult, right? Because if our own reading teachers, oftentimes don't feel equipped enough to really teach reading well, imagine, the math teacher, right, Jason? Sorry, I know you're a math teacher. And so, but that is part of it. And that is, that has to be part, especially now as kids aren't just doing bare number problems. They're doing number problems in context. They're having to really do a lot of problem solving and reading in math. That's part of like comprehension and comprehension strategies. How to comprehend a nonfiction, either text in science or like you're saying, a word problem, and how to dissect that. So yeah, that's absolutely essential, especially in secondary, but definitely as well in elementary.
Thank you, Heidi. Albert, I'm actually going to go to Dora just because she hasn't had a chance first. So I'm going to let Dora go and then I'll come to you, Albert.
Thank you. I just wanted to see if you had any data as far as the needs. I do know for a fact that across the nation, not just in the state of Arizona, there's a huge, huge gap as far as the literacy in general, the writing piece. Throughout the years, writing has declined and reading as well. And so I do know, because I used to be a principal and I was in constant contact with the Arizona Department of Education in putting something together. We know that there's a major need, not only for our students, but also for our teachers, for professionals, robust a curriculum that is really enforced throughout the years. So is there any research, any data available that you could present maybe later, or just what the data shows and what the needs are right now I mean, throughout the state of Arizona?
I mean, we definitely can provide with data. We know that the majority of our students are not reaching proficiency levels in literacy.
And
I
there
mean,
are-
generally, I could say that.
I think what's important to mention as well is,
No, and let me, go ahead, Lori.
I think what's important to mention as well, that we understand now more than ever that teaching reading explicitly has to be in the whole K-12 spectrum. And that includes that interdisciplinary approach that Heidi's discussing, having a very structured literacy system within our classrooms and building our capacity. And that's, what I'm gonna put in the chat is the Reading League research they've conducted, and this was done with psychologists, neuroscientists that talk about how the brain develops and how reading develops. And that's what's really important, that we have to teach it explicitly. We are not naturally born to read. So I will put that research on there so you have that as well.
Thank you, Flory. Albert, thank you for your patience. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'll be brief. Heidi, I want to thank you for the comments you made, in particular about new teachers coming to us. So part of my question is this. So if we know that's a dilemma that we have, what are the intentions in broaching this training through new teacher induction? And given the fact that we're seeming to have a high turnover in the teacher ranks, is there a plan for that? Have we talked about that yet?
So yes, we currently, our approach is we try to equip our new teachers with high quality curriculum and curriculum materials. They spend a day in with the actual writers of that curriculum, and they spend a day just learning how to implement that. So we want teachers to have a curriculum that is systematic, sequential, and what we focus on in the professional development at new teacher induction is how to best implement that, how to use that curriculum. We don't just hand them the curriculum, they spend an extensive amount of time learning how to implement that.
Yeah, and the second part of that is more of a comment. I think that I worry about this all the time. As some of you know, that I was a school principal at one time, among other duties in the school systems. But one of the things I worry about is the principal level of knowledge in this particular content, and how they can support their teachers daily, weekly, monthly. That we provide ample training to those principals as well, and the other support systems within the school systems individually. So I'm hoping that we can see something very directly aligned to that part of it. And then the second part too is that, and I'm sure it's somewhere in through the Title I schools and so forth, and the parent engagement part of this. I think Flory talked about that we have been experiencing over a course of time, over the years, a decrease in achievement, in particular with reading and the connection that reading has to every other content area in the school system, that how kids learn. That we often say to our parents in the early years, read to your child for 10 minutes a day. And so how do we factor that in this conversation, that, okay, we're going to spend a lot of money in this product and train our teachers and our principals, implement it. Then how do we handle that other component of parent engagement, especially in the early years?
Absolutely, right? I mean, it can't end once kids leave the school doors, right? They need to continue that. And parents need to know how to best support that. So you're right, parent education is absolutely essential as well.
Thank you, Albert, and thank you, Heidi. I'm gonna throw something out there as well, and then I'm gonna ask if we have something. Maybe I'll try to lead us towards a recommendation. I think all of the things, I actually took a picture of the 2 slides on recommendations, and was just looking through those. I would be hard pressed to say as a teacher, who's married to an elementary teacher, you know, I'd be hard pressed to say these aren't all important things. I think my challenge starts being in this capacity, right? It's really easy as my day-to-day capacity. Come on, TUSD, just buy it all. And then with an understanding, right? There's limited resources, financial resources that the district has. And that's just a reality that we face, that Ravi faces as a board member. And we may have some positive changes potentially in a more pro-public education governor coming into the position, but we really can't, we can't spend money that we don't have and that we may eventually have. And so, you know, I'm a little bit, I think, you know, having a reading event interventionist would be amazing. It's probably a $5 million ticket item and $5 million annually, as opposed to a resource that is purchased one time. I guess I think my question would be that will then hopefully help me as I think we need to formulate a recommendation. As we look at those things, what are the things that you would say, no, here's tier 1, here's tier 2 or whatever, here's what really, like, no, our teachers need this, our kids need this, and here's what would be if some Ravi says, hey, look, I found $10 million. Okay, great. And then, hey, you know, the education budget is just doubled. And so I think that's what I'm looking at. So I don't know, Flory or Heidi, if that's something you feel comfortable answering.
I'll give it a shot and then you can chime in. So I would say one of the most important things that we do to support our students is provide quality tier 1 instruction, right? And that happens through building teacher capacity. So I think that's absolutely essential. That is priority, as well as the resource, equipping our teachers with resources to support that. So having a quality tier 1 resource like we do in K-5 is important, right? Because when I'm looking at a brand new teacher, I need to be able to hand them something that is evidence-based, scientifically based, equip them to implement it, and as they become more experienced teachers, they get a deeper and deeper understanding of the science of reading. But I would say building teacher capacity is absolutely essential, as well as quality tier 1 instruction materials. You want to add to?
Okay, perfect. So folks, I'm going to throw something out and this would be something, and I'm hoping Tanya that you're catching what I'm going to kind of toss out, because I probably won't put it together all that well. But what I heard and what I think has really like gelled well with what this committee has done last year and this year is that priority of the employee, and in this case specifically the teacher. So what I was hearing and what I was hoping to hear, actually, quite honestly, was a recommendation that would look like prioritizing the things that build quality capacity for teachers, as well as the funding of a literacy program in K-12. And so I'm going to put that forward as a preliminary recommendation. And then I'm going to let us chew on that and see if people think that sounds like a good idea. We need to wordsmith it. We don't need to get too critical in wordsmithing, because we can tweak this when we get to our last meeting. But that was something that I was hoping to hear. That was something that I think has been a priority to the folks that have been on this committee. So I'm throwing that out there.
Can you repeat your recommendation?
Of
So I can
course,
write it
yes, I'm happy to do so. And then Tanya will make sure I don't mess it up too. And then Ross, we're going to go to you. So the recommendation would be to the governing board that to prioritize the things that build capacity, to build quality capacity for teachers, as well as the specifics of a literacy program in the 6-12 category. So hopefully we got that, and I'm going to pass it over to Ross and as we move forward to see if we have a recommendation.
Thanks, Jason. I was thinking, I still missed the last half of that, but the place I wanted to would concentrate on was first half anyway. I think we should be more specific than just the things. I don't know what those things are. I think maybe, many of the things Heidi and has pointed out, and think those of you who are teachers probably can be more specific about what those things should look like. But I think we should be specific about what we're recommending specifically.
So I think, Ross, for me, what it doesn't, I think what it does for me at least is it lets me know what things are excluded as opposed to, and so therefore what's included. So for example, like I had mentioned, a reading interventionist. A reading interventionist doesn't specifically, and they support, but they are not, they're not the teacher. They would support the teacher, they would support students, but that's an extra, as opposed to here's a training for you, Mr. McAllister, you're the teacher, and here's how we're going to help you be a better reading teacher. And so that, to me, I totally hear what you're saying. For me, I think this type of recommendation, what my hope would be is it's saying to the governing board, yeah, this is where the priority needs to be, and I think Flory had made a point of saying it, which is we know what the highest need is quality instruction, and the quality instruction comes from quality teachers. If we have that, then the other things kind of can more easily fall in place. And if we don't have quality instruction from a teacher who feels well supported through training and such, then we're kind of lost. But it's okay if there's something that we need, we can get more specific. I just worry. I worry because I don't know exactly what that would look like.
Okay.
Other thoughts on the proposed recommendation? Albert, please.
Just a thought on what Ross just said. That would it be helpful if we added based on the science of reading literature or study or review, that it's aligned specifically to that, whatever that program is?
I think that's perfect. I can only imagine that that when Flory and Heidi were to communicate with the governing board, that I'm sure they would say those words, but I think it is absolutely, it's phrasing that is really, it's new. It's not phrasing that we've used, right? So I think your point is well taken. I don't know exactly where we slide that in, but I think it needs to have a space in this recommendation. Totally agree with you, and I appreciate that. Okay, oh, please, Dora.
Just a quick clarification here, because I was looking at the original recommendation from Heidi and Flory, and they added basically the centralized coaching through the CSP training for administrators. That would not be in addition. That would not really cost, because that's part of what we do, right? I mean, that doesn't need to be approved by the board or anything else, because CSPs can get that training without any extra funding, and administrators the same way, right?
We just don't have CSPs at all sites.
Oh, okay, got it.
So adding CSPs to sites maybe that don't currently have one.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I think we have Tanya. Tanya, were you able to add in? Were you able to find a space to add in what Albert had said?
Yes, I'm taking notes as you guys talk. And then also with us recording, it will give me a readout of everything.
Perfect. Folks, I think what we're going to do, if you will allow me to, what I'd like to be able to do is I'd like us to kind of put a pin in our recommendation. We will definitely come back to it. And if there's some wordsmithing that needs to be done, or if there's some specificity that needs to be added, I will ask, Ross, if you see a way or something that we should add, let's get to that and in that last meeting. And let's so that we can really really get it. But I'm also just looking at the time and realizing we still have 2 other pieces. So if you all are comfortable, I'd like to have that as our preliminary recommendation. And then when we get to that last meeting, we'll touch it as needed. Does that work for everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you all. You know, I don't know, Flory and Heidi, I'm not sure that I have any ability to say you can leave. I don't think the chair gives me that ability, but I don't think you're needed for the rest of this. So we appreciate the presentation that you provided to us last
Thank
couple
you.
meetings
Thank
ago
you.
on
We
this stuff.
appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you both. All right, we press forward. We're on to item 5.02, the presentation and hopefully a recommendation for ESSER. This is to piggyback on the conversation that we had last meeting in October, and looking at those positions, and then hopefully coming forward with a recommendation. I believe, I think that it's John who's going to be doing that presentation. Is that right?
That is right, Jason. I
Great,
will
thank you.
jump on
Welcome.
in here. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Let me go ahead and start by sharing. For those of you I have not met, my name is John Lonzo. I'm the Senior Director for Grants and Federal Programs. So all our Title I funding in the district, school improvement grants, and then ESSER being a federal fund, or federal grant falls under that as well. So Jason, I'm gonna maybe just build a little background, make sure everybody's on the same page. This is information from previous presentations, and then also some new information, maybe just repack, well, not new information, it's a re-presentation of information, so it's hopefully a little clearer on what the decisions are. Just to set the stage, there are actually 3 levels of ESSER grants, ESSER 1, 2, and 3. ESSER 1 is essentially over. That grant closed at the end of September of this year. ESSER 2, that primarily was allocation all the way up through school year 22. So if you think about through the end of fiscal year 22 in June, that's kind of where the majority of that funding went. Any unspent amounts have been reallocated into programming this school year. That grant actually closes just over a year from now, about 10 months from now, September 30th, 2023. Essentially what we're going to be looking at is what is left in ESSER 2. Our approach with ESSER 2 is as the needs were coming up over the last year and a half of ESSER, ESSER 3, the very last one there. As the needs were coming up, we were presenting them to the governing board, kind of outlining strategic placement of the funds in departments and schools. And the schools the last 2 years have received school allocations from ESSER 3. There is a requirement with ESSER 3 that 20% of the funds be spent on academic loss. And so you'll see a little later in the presentation, I'll define that a little more of how the state's looking at that, but also how we have used our money to meet that requirement. Final allocations for ESSER 3 need to be in place by September 30th, 2023, and the grant closes a year after that, September 2024. So maybe for the committee here, there is, we do want to let schools know where they stand as far as the staffing aspect. That I think is most important, but there are decisions that could be made into next calendar year as we maybe find underspent areas of the grant that money becomes free and able to be reallocated. Okay, so maybe this is just a few parameters to be aware of and factors, I think is the best way to say of how these come into play. But moving forward, it is essentially just ESSER 3 is what we're talking about. So the end of ESSER 3 that has not been allocated. So all the financial numbers that you're going to see represent what is basically left in ESSER 3. The funding picture, the second bullet there, it shifts daily. So as principals make budgeting decisions, it affects what goes into academic loss or what comes out of academic loss, what counts as a capital item versus a kind of more of a learning item. So example is that approved learning loss positions, those have increased since I last updated the governing board in September. So principals have hired RTI teachers, they've hired, you're going to see teachers assistants now qualify, they've hired those. So that funding picture does shift, and a lot of that shifting is what qualifies or doesn't qualify as academic loss. The majority of the financial picture is based on allocations. So that's an important piece to keep in mind, that that third bullet, the example I gave there, we have 63 million of ESSER III dollars that has been allocated to the retention stipends for staff. So it's an awesome thing. Those are going out, actually, I think in the next couple of weeks at the beginning of December. But that's when we will first start drawing down on those. And that actually is allocated for the next 3 semesters. So just something to keep in mind as a committee is that, you know, you're going to see how much money is actually unallocated and that you can make decisions on. But a lot of that is money that's been allocated. It's hanging out there, hasn't been spent yet. Fourth bullet item kind of gets across what happens then when funding's allocated. Many times the actual financial impact or what is spent is different. So for example, we budget $70,000 for 1 FTE. So if we're going to hire a reading interventionist, our general amount we'll budget is $70,000. That's about $52,000 for salary, and then the rest is benefits. So that $70,000 though, we don't always spend $70,000 on that teacher. What happens is depends on if that teacher selects or uses certain benefits. Many times it ends up in a savings. If that teacher is a new teacher, there's typically savings there. For example, they may not use all the benefits and you have $61,000 that's actually spent. That results in the $70,000. I'm sorry, $9,000 savings. So there is that fluctuation between allocation and what's spent. Historically, and this is the last bullet, the financial impact for ESSER has been less than the allocations. Again, it's just budgeting with the grant, and then the actual drawdown many times has been less. That results in new unspent funds that can be reallocated later. I anticipate that would happen again. We've seen it happen a couple of times over the course of these grants. So we could be coming back, you know, next spring and saying, hey, there's an extra, you know, $800,000 that's been unspent and the allocation didn't hit that mark. Or next fall, we will have the last little bits that we need to make sure we get input on. So just kind of know that shifting picture of allocated versus actual spent. So here's our current standing. The top line, ESSER remaining. This is what was the number that was presented to the governing board in September, 19 million. The middle line there, minimum needed for academic loss. This has actually shifted since September because we have had teaching assistants that have been identified as meeting academic loss. And then we also have principals have been able to hire RTI positions or maybe additional counselors. And so that number has actually gone up. So the unallocated total there at the bottom this is what in September we were looking at, 6,977,000. That is the difference between those two. That's what the governing board and yourselves can recommend making where we would put that money. And the recommendation though is that we spend more on academic loss to ensure that we hit the minimum. The $12 million there that's circled in red, that is our minimum, meet that 20%. And that's budgeting again. That's not the actual spent at this point. We need to make sure we at least budget 12 million going through this. That will leave the 6.9 million at the bottom that is unallocated that this group can make some decisions on. So the 12 million, let's break that down a little bit more. That 12 million that we need to spend for academic loss is the line there at the bottom in the yellow. The end result is that we still need to spend over $12 million towards academic loss. We're actually doing pretty well in our spend down for this. So if you start at the top budget line there, 20% for academic loss, we needed to spend overall in this grant 34.5 million on academic loss. The reality is we've only really been spending down ESSER III in the last year. And so in the last year of getting this grant, these are the items that we've been able to charge through ESSER, charge to ESSER III's academic loss. Summer school, 2021, 2022, and 2023. The next items there are approved positions for fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. Kindergarten, so this current school year, we're going to pay 30% of the kindergarten teachers. As you know, the state only pays 50% through M&O for kindergarten teachers, and the district has to make up that additional 50%. So we have been able to use ESSER funding to be able to cover that. at a rate of 3.6 million. And then the last two items there, high school credit recovery program and the school turnaround program, those were items in September that the governing board approved. Those were qualifying as academic loss. Our total spent on academic loss is 22.4 million. And the bottom line again is we still need to spend just over 12 million on academic loss. On the right-hand side, I broke this down a little clearer so that people maybe had a few things they could point to, but approval criteria from ADE, from the State Department for academic loss. First, an item had to qualify as an ESSER cost. Okay, so it couldn't just be, let's say, like a marquee, which is kind of doesn't really hit the criteria for it. It had to have qualify as an ESSER cost, which all the items on the left do. It had to have an evidence-based research backing to it. And this is something you heard earlier with Heidi and Flory. The state is using this for ESSER as well, where it has to have evidence-based research to back it up. So for each one of these items on the left, we've had to turn in research on them. We've had to go through, some of these are in What's Works Clearinghouse, where they compile kind of the meta research in these areas. Each one of those has a research backing that we've had to turn in, and the positions themselves, reading interventionists, RTI teachers, counselors, social workers, we've had to provide evidence-based research for those in addition to any programs that we are using. And then finally, that last bullet there under approved criteria, job description that involves face-to-face student support. This is on the ADE, as they are kind of vetting these and going through them. Their requirement is that any positions that are approved, they need to be in a face-to-face capacity with students. And that they base that out actually off of our job descriptions that we turn in. So turning in a job description for reading and interventionists, it says that they work specifically with students. Turning in job descriptions for a curriculum service provider, that does not detail student-to-student work. They work with teachers. The other one that got caught up in this, and it seems kind of at the first you think they help with academic loss, but multi-tiered system of support positions. That job description very clearly talks about working with teachers and the administration and all the programming that's important to make sure students have the academic supports. It does not say that their job description is working specifically with students. So that's where some of these lines were drawn by ADE on what qualified for academic loss and what didn't. It had to do with the job description, and in the job description, it had to detail student-to-student work. The one that recently got approved were teaching assistants. Our teacher assistant job description was pretty vague. It's built that way. You can do a lot with a teacher assistant. So what principals have had to do to qualify the teacher assistants, they've had to provide additional evidence that those teacher assistants work with kids. They're turning in tutoring plans, intervention plans, rosters of kids that the teacher assistants work with, the evidence-based program that they're using, the amount of time they spend with kids. They've had to turn all that in to have teacher assistants qualified because it wasn't real clear or detailed in the job description. So that's a little bit on our standing with academic loss, how ADE approved, what positions qualify. And then on the right, bottom right, you can see the positions that have qualified. And then the note there at the bottom, the teacher assistant position, we did not include that in FY22 and 23 positions because we just got it approved. So to keep the numbers consistent, I did not add that in on this slide, just so you can see consistently what it qualified up to this point. Okay, so back to this slide. This is going to be kind of our placeholders we're going through and working through these items. The minimum needed for academic loss, 12 million. And then that bottom suggestion, the recommendation that more is spent on academic loss to ensure that the minimum is met. This came up during the governing board meeting in September, that to be in a safe spot, we should probably spend more towards academic loss. So when the final costs come in, we make sure we're over that line and not having to scramble at the very end. So I'm now going to detail what recommendation is to spend up to the academic loss requirement of 12 million, but also beyond that, just to ensure that we are able to meet the 20% mark. So here's the recommendation to meet that. And this actually is from the governing board meeting in September. 3 major areas: academic loss positions, recommending that the positions on the right that qualify for academic loss, that we use the remaining ESSER 3 funds to fund those positions for one more school year, for the 23-24 school year. So next school year, those positions, fund them one more school year. That would cost $7.6 million. That also now includes teacher assistant positions. So now, again, just kind of moving forward, knowing that teacher assistants qualify, funding teacher assistants for that additional year. Funding 30% kindergarten for next school year. So fiscal year 24, that would cost $3.6 million. And then one more year of summer school in 2024. Our average cost for summer school has been $5.6 million. I will point out that that summer school model, that is the big, like full summer school, every site, a full month, just kind of the biggest that we've been able to do with summer school, funding at that level again. As you can see, in the yellow there, that's a cost of $16.8 million. That is above the required minimum of $12 million. Okay, so anytime we're going above that $12 million, it's taking money from what's unallocated and putting it into the academic loss line. So that is about $4 million above that. There is, flexibility in there, and something like summer school, you could fund less summer school to free up unallocated funds. So, but to keep us safely above that minimum, 16.8 is recommended. Let's see, I'll move on to back to this placeholder here. So with that proposal, the items in yellow are what have changed. ESSER remaining still the same, 19.1 million. The district recommendation that you saw on the previous slide, I've now put that information in here. The district recommendation is, instead of spending just over 12 million on the minimum, to spend 16.8 million for academic loss. In doing that, what it does is the bottom line changes. Now, instead of we were around like just over 6.5 million, now that drops to 2.2 million that's unallocated, because we went from unallocated and actually allocated it to academic loss. So pushing academic loss up into a safe range drops the unallocated total at the bottom. Give a little more clarity to what the recommendation is now for the staff. And so this deals with staff. I guess maybe the middle line there is what kind of will show you where some of the staff is. Academic loss positions, that is 6.4 million, that or 7.6 million, that is full staff. 30% kindergarten, that's staff. So a lot of that has impacted staff, and this next slide will show you what that impact means. So at the top, academic loss, again, that number is what was on the previous slide, 16.8 million. These are the positions, and this is what would be impacted by funding this for one more school year. So that would fund 115 FTE. That's not all just position for position. There are some like reduced FTE that mean it's not one-to-one, but 115.6 FTE, that's $6.2 million. And then here's a breakdown of what that 6.2 would look at. So response to intervention, there were 50 teachers in RTI positions. Reading interventionists, there'd be 6 of those, 8 math interventionists, counselors, 15.9, social workers, just over 10, and teacher assistants, there were actually 104 FTE for teacher assistants. That teacher assistant position, that's actually, if you go the number of staff it impacts, it's much higher than that. So many teacher assistants are 0.8 FTE or 0.75, 0.9. So that teacher assistant actual count of people that touches, that's actually much higher. So all in all here, you have just the impact on the amount of staff there. And I just caught I'm gonna address it here before it comes up later. My numbers here with teacher assistants, I don't think I've added them into my overall academic loss position. So that 115 FTE, that is probably a little bit different, because if you see the teacher assistant is not matching that. Okay, and I'll go back and run those numbers, but the academic loss positions, this is what would be in place for one more school year. The unallocated, here are ideas for unallocated. Again, we have 2.2 million in unallocated. What is still on the table, and I'll kind of lay it out a little different on the next slide. Curriculum service providers, there are 19 of those. They do not qualify for academic loss. That is a decision this group would need to make and do a recommendation on, is for the 2.2 million that's available, is that spent on curriculum service providers? That's a cost of 1.2. The next item down, multi-tier systems of support. There's 30 of those positions. That's 2.1 million. Do you spend your unallocated directly on that? You can see and just follow the numbers. It's kind of one or the other. Right now, there's not enough unallocated to do both of those. And then kind of the third, sorry about that, the third bucket there at the bottom, other positions. There are still over 78 other positions out there at a cost of 3.1 million. To give you an example, I just kind of broke down the top number of FTE type positions that are still out there. School community liaisons, there's over 10 of those. Student success specialists, there's 7 of them. Site technology liaisons, there's 6. Instructional specialists, there are 14. That remaining amount of 2.2 million will not cover all of those buckets. They're really the 3 major buckets of curriculum service, multi-tiered, and other. So that's a decision that this group, I'd want to get some feedback from you on of what is more important there. I will point out curriculum service providers, these 19, there is a longer plan that we started a couple years ago at the beginning of ESSER to have curriculum service providers at all of our schools at the end of ESSER, but that funding is not ESSER. The long-term plan is not to fund them obviously out of ESSER. We are starting to build them into our district set-asides for Title I and our district set-asides for Title II. And then historically, there have been site-based CSPs, curriculum service providers, out of Title I funds at the site. So we've kind of mapped this out already, and curriculum service providers, there is a plan. If you decide that that's not a priority here to fund with ESSER, there is a plan to start filtering those into our district Title I and Title II set-asides to ensure that those are at every site. Again, that started 2 years ago. We are in, I guess, really in our second, heading in our third year of trying to get those layered into our other budgets. There is a plan to get those curriculum service providers covered. The multi-tiered systems of support, there is not a clear plan for those. Those have been funded, I think, historically out of DSEG or the Exceptional Ed IDEA grant. That one is not as clear. There's really not a big comprehensive plan right now for multi-tiered systems of support like there is for the CSP position. Okay, another look at this, just to kind of break it down again. The recommendation and some options for this group to consider, and then I want some feedback also of other options that maybe you see or recommendations. You could fund at the top for academic loss. You could fund those academic loss positions, and that covers 7.64 million. Fund 30% kindergarten at 3.6, fund summer school at 5.6. One option in there is to fund less summer school in 2024. That would free money up from the academic loss category. It would drop it, just as long as we don't get down below that 12.1 million. It would drop it, and it would actually put funding into the unallocated recommendations that are at the bottom of this slide. Unallocated is 2.2 million again. You could fund as many MTSS and CSP positions as possible. I bring those positions up because those were 2 of 5 positions that we asked principals to ensure were at their schools. So from the very beginning of ESSER, we based the school funding and the purpose of that funding around making sure students in TUSD had access to intervention teacher, additional counseling if needed, social work, MTSS position, and a CSP position. Principals were asked to ensure that those 5 positions, enough support was at their schools so students had access to those 5. 3 of those 5 qualify for academic loss and essentially have to be built in and funding spent on them. 2 of them, the MTSS and CSP, don't qualify for that category by ADE. So that's why it's in the unallocated listing there. To fund both MTSS and CSP, that's a cost of 3.4 million. It obviously doesn't fit all the way into unallocated. And then funding all the other ESSER funded positions for one more year. That would be at a cost of 3.1 million. Again, there's not enough right now unallocated to do both of those. So looking just at the unallocated, 2.2 million, here's really the two options that I just finished talking to, but again, just to see all the numbers in front of you. Funding the MTSS position. That would be 2.1 million. That would be 30 FTE spread across different schools. That would ensure that the MTSS position is in place for one more school year in 23-24. Another option is starting to really chip away at the other positions. There are 78 other positions. That's $3.1 million. I outlined the top 4 of those that are funded in schools. But that is also something this group we could look at is which of those other positions we would want to start taking on. Again, both of them right now don't fit. There is the option again of freeing up a little bit of funding out of academic loss out of that recommendation, reducing summer school and moving it into this pot of money to give you a little more flexibility to work with this. All right, so Jason, I think we covered a lot of ground there. I think maybe I should pause and just see if there's anything specific I need to explain again or questions.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to let everybody know we're going to have to try to wrap up on the sooner, and so hopefully we can get ourselves to a recommendation. I do see Albert's got his hand raised, and so we're going to go to Albert, please.
Thank you, John. That was very detailed. I appreciate that. A question though, if it's possible, is it possible to get the information on the distribution of those positions by school?
Yes, that is something that we can pull up, distribution by school.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
John, how close are we on your presentation? How close are we to done?
That is the bulk of it there. The only other slide I had, there was a question, I think, from the previous budget advisory about how ESSER funds have been used and prioritized. And actually, this is by school on some of these presentations, but there is a public ESSER website that has each one of the presentations to the board broken down. So you can get a sense of what's at schools, other funding, how it's used, capital projects. So I would point some of the committee to that website that they can go through and really peruse how it had been spent. And that actually was it there, Jason.
Okay, I appreciate it, John. If we could then, I'm gonna open it up because I mean, it'd be nice if we're able to get ourselves to a recommendation because we are once again behind, which is this is what we do. So it's okay. We'll roll with it because that's what educators do. And everybody here is an educator or somebody who's supporting education. So I'm going to open. I've got some thoughts in my head, but I'm going to open it to some other folks first. If anybody has a question, comment that they would like to make. Well, I haven't seen anybody else raise their hand. Pardon me, John. I'm going to ask a question. Do we have any evidence that shows growth, whether it be through test scores or something else in relation to students attending summer school?
Say that very last part again, Jason.
Yeah, I apologize. Do we have any evidence of growth for students as far as their academics that attend summer school as opposed to those who do not attend summer school?
Yes, I don't know if Heidi or Flory are on here, but I know we do have summer school rosters, and now that we actually have, some clean test scores, right? The AASA test coming out, that is something that we're going to be looking at for ESSER, just so you know, some of the data that we are going to be asked down the road to turn in is exactly that, evidence of academic growth. We haven't been asked for it yet, but we're ready to pull that, and summer school will be one. I don't have that right now, but I know I will be working with our A&E department, down the road to gather that. And I can start pulling some of that if you want it.
Well, no, I mean, I appreciate it. I think it's probably the BAC will already have had to make our recommendations to the governing board, but I'm sure it'll be helpful to the board. I think I think for me as a teacher, knowing the summer school programs have been, not quite as rigorous. Is probably the way that I would best describe it. Not to suggest that it's fluff, because it's not, but I don't know that we've generally had as rigorous programs of the when it comes to summer school. And so I don't know if their impact is as strong as, let's say, somebody in a position, in an MTSS or CSP type position. I will also just throw it out there, and then I'll open it back up for other people to make some comments, ask some questions, or see if somebody has a position towards recommendation. I'm kind of, I think I've already kind of said that I'm leaning a little bit towards maybe looking at reducing the expense towards summer school and putting it towards maybe some of these other positions that are funded that could be funded for next school year. That would be support structures during the traditional, calendar school year. But I will also add in, and it's not to a point that I would recuse myself, but my wife is currently working as a CSP. So I just want to let that be known. It doesn't change my opinion of these positions or anything else. Just wanted it to be shared. With that, would other people like to share questions, comments, or potentially get us towards a recommendation? Dora, please.
I really have to agree that we really need to know more, a little bit about the allocations by school, because then we can actually see what they have already in place, the number of students, maybe some FTEs can be shared depending on the number of students per school and the extra support they have. So those are, I think, once we get that allocations by school, we can make determinations of what really is needed and where the evidence is. I personally think MTSS and CSPs are critical, one FTE per school. I've seen it in the past. But as far as the other jobs, like the school community liaison and school success specialist, all the other ones, I think it's something to consider once we see the allocations.
Thank you, Dora. Other comments, questions? So I find us in a bit of a spot here, and here's what I think maybe I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that we start next meeting with a really brief, and it's going to have to be really brief because we are absolutely behind at this point, but a really brief presentation. Maybe John can share the allocation piece, and it's going to have to be really, really quick. That will then immediately lead us into the discussion of a recommendation about these remaining funds. And, and maybe it is, as Dora was talking about, maybe it looks like finding a way to support the MTSS and CSP positions, and having to take a little bit from summer school to do so, but therefore not supporting the site techs or instructional specialists or some of the other positions. Maybe that's where we go. I'm not sure, but I'm not hearing strongly that anybody is ready to make a recommendation at this moment, and I don't want us to rush to that. So if people are comfortable with that, and John, hopefully you would be comfortable with joining us as well. Just a quick rundown of what the allocations look like, and it really would just be a quick spreadsheet, and then allowing us to make a recommendation from there. John, is that something you feel comfortable with?
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Okay, thank you. Committee, I'm going to take silence to mean, as a middle school teacher, silence means the confusion, and I'm going to take it to be the opposite in this context. Are people comfortable with us moving forward with that recommendation, with that suggestion for next meeting? We start quickly with John and then jump into a recommendation. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Wonderful. With that then, so thank you, John. Thanks for joining us. Ricky, and then I know, and Tanya, and I know Robbie had to step away. We have our very full plate. so we're going to jump in next time to talk about looking at John giving us that data, and then we'll go forward with a recommendation. Then we still need to be talking about ESSER and what the future holds once these monies once these monies go away. So that's going to have to be the bulk of the conversation next time, with an understanding that we have our additional task, which is to look at capital funding, which clearly is quite a undertaking as well. Folks, is everybody? Oh, please go ahead, Ricky.
So are you still planning on wanting to talk through capital on the 6th, considering the amount of ESSER you still want to look at? I just want to make sure that I let the team know that they don't have to be ready in a couple of weeks, that they, because the capital one's going to be it's going to be a fat conversation. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and what I'm looking at is, unless I'm mistaken, I don't think I am, and Tanya, please correct me if I'm wrong, I believe we have 2 meetings remaining, correct?
We do.
Right. I think we have, right? We have December 8th and January, yeah, January 19th. Thank you. So, if what we do, here's what I would say then. What we're going to have to do, if we're going to have the last meeting be exclusively working on capital, then that means everything else has to be wrapped up at our next meeting. Everything, recommendations have to be done, including the secondary piece of ESSER has to be completely done, and we have our recommendations done. So that then we are feasting on this capital piece, and that's the only thing we focus on, concluding capital, concluding everything with that second meeting. So that's, I think, Ricky, I think that's where we're at just as far as the schedule. I think we're out of time when it comes to adding a meeting after that January deadline. And I think I just, with the holidays and everything else, I think we're going to have a hard time trying to schedule another meeting. So that's where I think, to answer your question, Ricky, I think what we've got to do is our next meeting is going to be concluding this ESSER piece that we talked about today, starting and concluding the second ESSER piece, and then making sure we have our recommendations, those 3 recommendations, done at the end of the meeting, so we hit hard capital on the last meeting, concluding with the recommendation. So then we have a package of recommendations. Is that something that everybody feels comfortable with?
And all in December?
So no, the January meeting is capital.
Okay, so January. Okay, just want to make sure. I'll let them know that they've got a little bit more time then. That was just my only question.
No, it's a good question. But what we're going to have to be ready for is there's going to have to be some ability. We're just not going to have the ability to say, hey, can you go back and get us some information? So there's going to have which is really rough, and I get that's hard on your folks, Ricky. But I don't know another way for us to get things in the timeline that we've got. Montserrat, please.
Not that I want to make any more work for us, but has this committee ever in the past added another meeting? I have no idea. Are we open to that at all?
It's not that we couldn't, and I personally am not opposed to it. The issue, what we start running into is the later that we push forward a recommendation, the harder it is for the governing board to support that, because they start chomping on these things. They've already been doing some, right? So I think it gets harder and harder for us to get them the information with enough lead time. Ricky, maybe you have more to add to that.
And just, I don't know, maybe I'm kind of piggybacking on Montserrat's, not want to cause any more ripples, but the next board meeting where John is going to take all of these ESSER recommendations is before the next budget advisory meeting. So the budget advisory committee meets on the 8th, but we go to the board on the 6th, and they only have one meeting in December at the board. So we'll.
But we weren't going to come forward with a recommendation regardless, Ricky, right?
Right. So I just want you guys to be aware that that's going to change up. That may change the dynamic of it, because they're going, we're going to go with recommendations based on the internal conversations that staff had, the financial planning that we're doing. We're going to put that in front of the board. That's going to be made public. They're going to make some choices and they're going to give us direction. Once we're kind of down the path of direction, at that point, we're really just kind of going back and we're presenting, what we've got and what we were given. We can certainly take the recommendation so that, back to the board in the spring. But it's just, you just kind of be aware that by that point, 3 months in, considering that we've only got like a year and a half left of ESSER, we're probably going to be into the meat of doing some of the stuff that you guys may want to address. But it doesn't change the fact that you can still do what you need to do. But the one kind of monkey wrench is that board meeting comes beforehand.
Okay. Well,
So-
I think, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, I'm sorry. So then, if that is the case and recommendations are going to be made at December 6th meeting, do we need John to come back? Or do we want to try and do something right now? I don't know if it's worth continuing an ESSER conversation if board will have already potentially started providing direction 2 days before our meeting.
I mean, there's nothing that says we can't come forward right now with a recommendation and make that our official recommendation when it comes to this component of ESSER, which is what we see the remaining funds best utilized. We absolutely can do that, and we can do that right now. But I would say we should probably come forward with something quick. And because that's a good point, Montserrat, and
Yeah.
Ricky clarifying that point. So, Dora, you kind of leaned into a recommendation. I don't know if you want to make to formalize that.
I don't know if I can articulate that, but I do know that it's so worth investing that I know that would be over the $2.2 million. But the MTSS and CSPs are those two critical positions, FTEs in schools right now, honestly. As a principal, I can tell you that it's so investment. In order to fund that, obviously, some of it would have to be centrally funded, like a couple of the CSPs maybe balance it out. If I were to really put it as a priority, it would be the MTSS and the CSPs.
Okay.
And then whatever else needs to be funded by central, then they would take that.
I'm going to take that as a recommendation, and I'm going to hear Serena and then Montserrat, and we'll see if we can kind of get something that's a little bit better encapsulation. Serena?
Yes, please.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to echo what Dora was saying. My preference, my opinion is that the MTSS and the centralized CSP positions are the priority here. And I say that, as a perspective of the education director for the Pascua Yaqui tribe and seeing how the new implementation of MTSS is really impacting our students' ability to grow and acquire new knowledge. Just the format for implementation is much stronger now when there's more cohesive organizational structures throughout the district that are better supporting our students.
Thank you. Montserrat?
To clarify your recommendation, Dora, is that taking then from the summer school allocation or the number as is recommended for summer school and keeping it flat?
Well, I was thinking of keeping the summer school, basically leaving the summer school, but the allocated funds, I believe it was 2.2 million. And that basically, if you were to fund the MTSS and the CSP, it's a 3.1, which is obviously over. It's almost $1 million over. But I was thinking about the summer school because I think it's a good investment in the summer because I do know there's reason to back it up. If a student doesn't, the students that actually continue during the summer gain a lot more versus the students that just stay home and don't take any academics during the summer. So I mean, I don't have the research to back it up right now, but I do know for a fact that it's worth the money, and not just because of academic loss and to improve and growth, but also because of just that everything that's going on in their lives at home to support that.
Okay. So we're gonna have to then kind of tweak this a little bit. Albert, I'm gonna hear from you, and then I think that maybe we can try to pull this together as a recommendation.
You know, I agree with Dora that we move forward with that that's included in the recommendation. I still think it's important that we get that allocation distribution by school. I think that's important for us to know that. But I think if we have to make a recommendation before the next governing board meeting to make it tonight, I'm in agreement with what was said already.
Okay, so I'm gonna voice that I'm in agreement. I think that those positions being at school are vital. I think we do have a bit of a challenge because, to Montserrat's point, we're attempting to ask the district to spend more money, and so they'd have to be taking it from someplace, because as I did, I think it's 3.3 to keep MTSS and CSP in total, and that's not, you know, and there's only 2.2 million remaining, so it has to come someplace. I'm not hearing us suggesting that it needs to come specifically from summer school, and Dora made a point. I'm not trying to devalue summer school. So I think the recommendation would be, and John, I'm glad that you're here to hear this. The recommendation from this committee, and this is the formal recommendation that I'm hearing from Dora, and Dora, correct me if I'm mistaken, and then I'm going to take Serena as the second, if everybody's comfortable with it, which is that we ask that the governing board prioritize the number one priority with the remaining ESSER 3 funds, the positions of MTSS and CSP, at the expense of the $3.3 million, and ask that the governing board find the appropriate places to find the difference to fund that. Dora, do you feel comfortable with that being the recommendation?
Perfect. I love the way you said it. That's great.
Okay.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Okay, Serena, do you feel comfortable being the second to that motion?
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to open it to discussion if there's any discussion. Otherwise, we're going to take a vote. Okay, I do not see any discussion, so we've got a formal motion with a second. All in favor of that motion, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. We now have a motion. I know this was a lot of work and we're very late. I'm in big trouble. So we're gonna hit it hard. We will try to get the agenda out to you as early as possible for the next meeting. And we'll start working on that. If you need anything from me, please feel free to email me, through my TUSD email. Thanks one and all. Tanya, thank you for keeping us in line. And everybody
One
drive
more
safe.
thing, Jason.
Tanya, do we need to close it?
Just one more thing on the vote for the minutes. I did not get who motioned the first time. I got the second, but not the motion.
Oh, I don't know who made that motion.
I
Actually,
seconded.
Taylor made the
Ms.
motion.
Taylor,
Yeah.
Yes, she did.
perfect, got it.
Okay. Thanks all, everybody. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. We'll see you after the holiday. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Tanya.